This is Nasha Kasha, Ukrainian Almanac. 28 minutes of stories for everyone about Ukrainian life. Nasha Kasha is heard on 16 campus and community radio stations from Newfoundland to British Columbia. I'm your reporter, Stefan Andrusiak. This is episode 194.
Can steal, girl.
Turn the dial on any radio.
The Mohawk barricade protest is into its 8th day. As well, barricades are up across a number of rail lines in different areas of the country.
Across Canada, news this February has been dominated by protests and blockades at government buildings, on rail lines, even on highways. At the root of this story is the construction of 670 kilometers, that's 416 miles, worth of pipeline. The Coastal Gas Pipeline, to be exact. Elected chiefs have approved it. Hereditary chiefs, claiming their land has never been ceded to the state, are blocking it. A British Columbia court granted an injunction against the blockade. That injunction allows police to move in, move the barricades, and make arrests. Now, for the next 28 minutes, imagine that you're living in a country where the court has ruled police are given powers to enforce that decision, but you may not trust the judge. Such a country for the longest time has been Ukraine. Today on Nasha Kasha, we'll meet an American federal judge working to strengthen Ukraine's rule of law. Bohdan lives in Annapolis, Maryland.
Yes, my name is Bohdan Futay. Presently, I'm still a federal judge in the United States of America. Actually, I was the first of Ukrainian heritage to become a federal judge, being nominated by President Reagan and then confirmed by the Senate. I was born in the city of Buchach, in the western part of Ukraine. That's the state or oblast of Ternopil, on June 28, 1939.
Якби не мороз, якби не мороз, та й не залягла роса, то й пішла б я, до Тернополя й боса.
My father was from the village of Barish, and my mother came from Ivano-Frankivsk, settled in Verbiatin, where my mother and my father met. They fell in love and married.
Buchach is, you said it's a city?
Well, it's the city in Ternopil, and the oblast of Ternopil is very well known.
Якби не мороз, якби не мороз, та й не залягла роса, то й пішла б я, до Тернополя й боса, то й пішла б я, до Тернополя й боса.
Brothers, sisters?
No, I was the only child in the family.
War engulfed Ukraine, and your parents left. Can you give me a sense of the circumstance?
We left because they were looking for when we tried to visit my grandfather. Actually, we found out that he was killed by the Russians, by the Soviets, the Bolsheviks. They came in looking for my father because of his Ukrainian patriotic activities, and they came to looking for my father. And when my grandfather said that he did not know where my father was, well, he was killed right in front front yard of the property, and the entire family was taken to Siberia, and we never heard from them again.
Je ne sais pas, je vous verrai, oh non. Mais c'est peut-être pas la fête. Et l'essentiel que quelque part très loin, il y a quelqu'un comme le soif infatigable. Je prendrai pas le bonheur de quelqu'un, le reflet de l'écho ne volerai pas là-bas. J'ai pensé à vous, je sais que vous existez. Mon âme est à l'aube de celle-là.
We decided that we had to escape, and we started going with other Ukrainians, by the way, that were doing the same thing. And we went through Czechoslovakia, through that area, and remember some people really telling us, hey, well, why are you leaving? The Russians are our friends. The Germans pushed back the communists, and so we were able to escape. We went with them, and we wound up in Strasbourg. And then from Strasbourg, we went to Berlin. My father went to the front. They took my father to the front, you know.
The German army took him to the front.
The Ukrainian division at that time. So for a while he was there, and then while we were in Berlin, we were able to leave on the last train to the city of Ulm.
With your father?
Well, no, with my mother. And within, I believe, 3 or 4 days, my father showed up. And then naturally the Allied forces came in, and the U.S. soldiers were already in the city.
You didn't come to the United States immediately. You went to Argentina. Can you just give me briefly a history of that?
Yeah, well, my father's 2 uncles, they were living in Argentina, and they sent us papers, invitations. At that time, there was no immigration yet to the United States of America. We went to Buenos Aires, Argentina, where we lived for almost 10 years. It was very nice. I enjoyed it very much. We were there during the Perón era. I went to elementary school, I went to high school, and actually I was in my last year of the high school in Argentina. We lived in the suburb of Buenos Aires, a place called Avellaneda, and it was not until 1954 that we started doing the paperwork to go to the United States of America.
Nasha Kasha comes to you from CHRW 94.9 FM on the campus of Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. We're heard on CHMR 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland, on CKDU 88.1 FM in Halifax, on local 107.3 FM in St. John, New Brunswick, on CJAS Radio 93.5 FM in Saint Augustine, Quebec, on CJLO 1690 AM in Montreal, on CFRC 101.9 FM in Kingston, on CFMU 93.3 FM in Hamilton, on CKMS 102.7 FM in Kitchener-Waterloo, on CJAM 99.1 FM in Windsor and Detroit, on CKLU 96.7 FM in Sudbury, on CILU 102.7 FM in Thunder Bay, on 101.5 UMFM in Winnipeg, on CFMQ 98.1 FM in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, on CFBX 92.5 FM in Kamloops, and on CIVL 101.7 FM in Abbotsford, British Columbia. Was there a feeling during the Perón era that you had to get out?
Actually, no. I did not have the feeling that we had to get out. I think the feeling was that perhaps there would be a better life in the United States.
Did you have at an early age an inkling that you would be interested in law?
Actually, my inkling in law started when I was in high school in Argentina. We had a teacher who was a lawyer. He was a history teacher and also a lawyer. And that's something that I became very interested in because my major at Western Reserve University was history. I had a BA in history, MA in history, and I started my PhD, and then I went to law school. He was the one that gave me the incentive to be a lawyer.
Where did you land in the United States?
We landed actually in Miami, and then we went to New York because my father's cousin was living there. He's the one that had invited us. You had to have an invitation. His name was Vasily Orikhovsky. But finally we went to Cleveland, and the reason we went to Cleveland is because my father's cousin, he had an appointment at the Cleveland Clinic, had for a job to be working at the Cleveland Clinic. So my father went with him, but while being in Cleveland, he met all of his friends from the displaced persons camps. They were there from Fiesen, they were there from Mittenwald. So all of the sudden, and they had jobs there. So my father was offered a job in a construction company, and he just called my mother and said, "Hey, maybe we should live in Cleveland."
Talk to me about Ukrainian life as a young man in Cleveland.
My life was, involved with Ukrainian youth organizations. I always felt very close to Ukraine, and I tell you, even now when I travel, when I am in Ukraine, and then I talk to them, things like that, they always say, What are you really? Are you an American or are you Ukrainian? I always give an answer that my mother always says that your shirt is closer to your body than your overcoat.
Одягни сорочку, любий сину, вишиту червоними нитками, бережи у серці Україну, і сорочка оберегом стане. Хрестиком сорочку вишивала на лянім біленькім полотні, щоб сорочка щастя дарувала, завжди захищала у біді.
Сорочка ближче кожуха. But I was always interested in Ukraine. I was always interested. Well, I was, as the president of the also VUKK in Cleveland for 11 years, as a president of the Ukrainian American Bar Association. So I was always involved with Ukrainian doings. And then when I became a federal judge, the State Department started these programs, rule of law programs. There were over 2,000 judges that applied, and about 20 or 30 were selected. And I was one of those that was selected to do rule of law programs in Europe and the Soviet Union at that time. And the first program that I went to Moscow, when we arrived, there was no longer a Soviet Union. There was just that you had the Russian Federation and you had Ukraine already as an independent country and other independent countries.
What's the corollary? Rule of politics?
Well, rule of law is basically the concept, if you go, no one is above the law. No person is above the law. There is also a concept of separation of powers, right? So you have an executive, you have a legislature, and you have the judicial branch of government. And by the way, we're fortunate, Ukrainians are fortunate, because that concept already was present in 1710 and the Constitution of Philip Orlik. That started way back, and even some justices of the Supreme Court of the United States, Sandra Day O'Connor, at conferences when they were talking about separation of powers. They said, well, okay, our Constitution came about almost 80 years after the Constitution of Philip Orlick, and already they had that concept of separation of powers because they talked about a separate judiciary, as well as also the concept of private ownership of property.
What made you learn it enough in the law to become a judge? Do you run for judge for that position?
Well, it's kind of interesting.
First of all, what kind of law did you practice?
Well, I practiced a lot of criminal law. I was a prosecutor. Oh, I forgot to tell you. I was a prosecutor for the city of Cleveland. So I was a prosecutor. I was executive assistant. I was the director of the bicentennial for the city of Cleveland.
Is prosecutor an elected position in the state?
No, it's an appointed position. I became involved with Republican politics. In 1980, when Reagan was running for president, I was very much involved, and I was an alternate delegate to the convention in Detroit. And after the convention, when Ronald Reagan got elected president, I received an offer from the White House. They offered me the position of chairman of the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission. I was part of the management team of the Department of Justice. And one day I'm sitting at the commission, and I get a call from the Attorney General and say, "Hey, Bohdan, we have a meeting." So Ed Meese turns to me, the Attorney General, and says, "Bohdan, why don't you become a judge?" I said, "Well, I'm waiting for a position in Cleveland, at the district court in Cleveland." And he says, "Well, we don't have anything not available, but we have in Washington, D.C." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I looked at it, and that was the process. And then when the position became available in Cleveland, they asked me whether I wanted to go to Cleveland. I said, "No, I'll stay in Washington, D.C."
So to be clear, it's an appointment.
Well, it is nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. I had to go through the process. In 2017, there was the poll that were taken. 68% of Americans approved of federal judges doing their work. That is extremely important because, you have in some of the countries, and talking about Ukraine, where basically if there is 7 or 8% that approve of the work that the judges are doing is a lot.
Let's get to Ukraine. You spoke about Orlick's Constitution. How did you introduce yourself, or how did they ask you? How did that process begin where a newly independent nation is seeking advice?
Well, that process started because of the rule of law programs that I was telling you, and also my involvement with RUCH. At that time, I was the chairman president of RUCH in the Washington area.
RUCH means movement.
RUCH means movement, that's right. But RUCH was the organization that was set up while Ukraine became independent. And so I had a chance to meeting some of the people that were involved, and they knew that I was a judge. They knew my involvement, and they started inviting me to some of these programs. And I also, the ambassador in Moscow knew that I, being of Ukrainian background, being a judge, and he flew me in. He was going to Kyiv on some event, so I went on a plane with him to Kyiv, and they invited me to be part of the working group on the Constitution of Ukraine that was adopted in 1996.
The Constitution of Ukraine, which country would it be most similar to in nature?
Well, it has combination. First of all, is they wanted to stay with Europe, so that would be the civil law concept, okay, the statutory, not what we have. It's
So
still
France.
For France and Germany, I would say France and Germany, not England, not common law like England or the United States. So, but there are some intersections that you have that have a little bit of one and a little bit of the other.
Guilt, proving of guilt.
It has to be proven beyond the reasonable doubt. That's the U.S. concept, so it's there. They also talk about the adherence to the law. No one is above the law. The concept of rule of law is part of the Constitution. So all of these things are in there, but being there does not mean that they're being carried out. Sometimes they're not carried out, and that's the problem. That's the criticism that exists. On paper, everything looks very good. Even though there's separation of powers, the president would call the judges in. They have a separate constitutional court, and then they have courts of general jurisdiction. The president would call the judges in and tell them how they should be independent. But he's telling them how they should be independent according to his mode and his view on the subject.
By that very meeting, they're not independent because he's telling them.
And I would tell them all the time. And then after the president does that, you would have the Speaker of Parliament doing the same thing. He would call them in, and he would give them the riot act. And the same thing then, the Prime Minister would do the same thing. So after a while, the judge will say, well, wait a minute. One is saying this, the other one is saying that, and that is saying that. We're going to do it on our own, okay? So that could be a problem sometimes. And the other thing is also that every time you get a new president, they're talking about changing the Constitution. But they're having discussions about changing the Constitution the way they feel it should be changed and adopted, not the way the Constitution already provides how the changes should be made. Because the Constitution clearly says that you have to have a majority vote of the Parliament. Then you have to send it to the Constitutional Court to see whether the procedure was adopted properly, and then you have to vote it by a 2/3 vote in order to change the Constitution. The last change that was done with the judiciary under President Poroshenko was done properly. That we have about 5,000 judges in Ukraine under the new concept of the changes for the judges in the Constitution, and there's an opportunity yet for another 1,000 judges to be appointed. They are appointed by the president, but the testing of the judges is done by the Higher Qualification Commission. The nomination of the judges is done by the Higher Council of Justice, and then the president just informs the parliament who the judges will be.
As was in your case, there was an appointment or a nomination, but there was a vetting process and an approval.
Exactly.
So we're talking about the root of law, we're talking about the rule of law, we're talking about the Constitution, which is law at the pinnacle of a country's reference point. But the lack of confidence that you spoke about in Ukraine toward the judiciary, that happens when you have a dispute with your neighbor about where his fence should be.
Well, that's true. That happens all the time. But, I think also there's this situation.
So what went wrong? So why is that?
Yeah,
why?
Ukraine has been independent for 28 years. All right. And all of us are expecting Ukraine to be at the level of countries that have been independent and developing their laws, their system for hundreds of years. That is almost impossible. 25 or 30 years in history is not much. At first, when Ukraine became independent, I said it will take about 25 years. I'm convinced now that will take 2 generations, not one. And 2 generations, you're talking about 50 years. Okay, it's like with this election that took place, all right? The new president, unknown person, only because he was an actor, right, on TV.
Well,
program.
he was a lawyer as well.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that that he is a lawyer. He is a lawyer, but his profession was basically acting. So and he was able to get 75% of the vote of the people, and especially young people from the ages of 19 to 39. 75% of an election. An election was declared transparent and democratic by all of the observers. No one criticized the election process.
So no doubt that this is the president, this is the leadership Ukrainians as an electorate want.
Well, as what he was saying at that time, let's hope that he stays with that, because it's not only what he is saying, but what he is doing.
So from an advisory point of view, we're wrapping. From an advisory point of view, you've watched this unfold. Do you think Ukraine is now at the point where they've said, thank you very much for all of your input. We have the raw material with which to consider our future. Now it's up to us. Thank you very much. We're going to take it from here.
Well, I think Ukraine has gone through quite a process. You know, you had the Orange Revolution, then you have the Revolution of Dignity, and you have this election, and they see what's happening. You had the illegal annexation of Crimea. Ukraine now is moving towards Western Europe, through the European Union. You have almost 80% of the people that want to go that way. You have majority of the people that want to be part of NATO, and so they're on one hand they're trying to get the legal system back in order, what it should be. On the other hand, they're also concerned about the future, the integrity of their country, the sovereignty, the independence, and having both of these, they feel that with this person they can do it. Hopefully, he will not let the people down. I am an optimist that Ukraine will go through the process, and Ukraine will remain an independent, sovereign country, and there is a lot of opportunities for people that live in Ukraine to accomplish and to obtain whatever they want in their lives.
A pleasure getting to know you. Thank you very much. Щиро дякую.
Бандуристе, орле сизий, добре тобі, брате. Маєш крила, маєш силу, є коли літати. Тепер летиш в Україну, тебе виглядають. Полетів би я з тобою, та хто привітає.
Musically, we led off the show with Luis Milici's Symphonia in Memoriam. It's an homage to the memory of Argentina's Maria Eva Duarte de Perón. Taras Chubay and Kozak System were on the road to Ternopil with Do Ternopolia. Oksana Mucha sang Je ne sais pas, I do not know. Vasil Popaduk played Adios Nonino. Lesya Holicka, Vishita Sorochka. And this is Banduriste Orle Sizi, a Taras Shevchenko poem, Oleksiy Karakesha, performing. Partial funding for Nasha Kasha comes from the Shevchenko Foundation. Back in a week, God willing, до милої зустрічі за тиждень часу, дорогі слухачі.